Yeah, sure. So I'm Aaron Gonsalves. I'm the Global Head of Talent Acquisition at iFarm Consulting. We're a recruitment company that specialises in life sciences recruitment globally across 8 countries around the world. In terms of the background of myself, I started out as a 360 recruiter. I focused on recruitment in the IT sector across Oracle, SAP, and then business intelligence. I did that for about 4 to 5 years. And then I moved into internal recruitment, where I've spent the majority of my time in the recruitment sector, placing anywhere from graduates to experienced recruiters up to directors in the UK, in the US, and even in Germany as well. So yeah, I've had a bit of a varied background, but talent acquisition has been kind of my bread and butter for the last 7 years or so. So in terms of my way of researching the market and keeping up to date, I do read websites such as the Recruiter, the REC website, Recruitment Buzz. I do tend to listen to podcasts as well. I try and just get as much knowledge from what other people are seeing in the market as possible. But the main source of information is actually just speaking to people. So when I'm on the phone to candidates myself, or even speaking to other hiring managers through the industry that I know, I will ask them how they're finding things. I will ask them if there's anything that they've noticed in the market that maybe I haven't seen myself. I think that's a very kind of topical question right now, because changes to the economy, the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis as well. What we're noticing, or what I'm noticing in the market, is that candidates either want to stay where they are because they're uncertain about kind of where the economy is going to go, and whether if they do change jobs, if it's going to be there's going to be stability there for them. Or if they do move, they want to get the most money as possible. And companies at the minute are willing to pay more than the average to get the right person on board. It's a competitive market right now. So that can affect myself and my peers in the market quite a bit, because when you work for a direct agency like I do, we have salary bandings that we have to stick to. We can't always go over those bandings. So you're kind of capped at what you can offer someone as an opportunity. And then it's about just staying in touch with those people that maybe are thinking that it's not the right time to move right now, because they could be potential candidates in the future. So I guess there's a number of things I do, and I kind of feel like I'm giving the secrets away to what I do. But when I'm trying to go after a candidate or headhunt a candidate that I may have found on LinkedIn, and I've messaged that person maybe several times, one of the things that I do is I search for their name, maybe the school they went to, on a job board, and try and find an old CV for that person. And before they got into recruitment, they may have been looking for other jobs. And if they have that CV still active on a job board, it have a mobile number. And if they have a mobile number, I'll call that person. And yes, you might catch them off guard, but it gives you an opportunity to speak to that individual and sell the role that you're trying to get across to them. I think the other things that I've done as well is if I'm looking for something specific in terms of industry knowledge or sector, so someone's going to be working on a particular desk that I'm recruiting for, then I'll search company websites for that specific niche, or I'll look for anyone who's posted adverts for those roles. Then I'll find the name of the person that's posted that job and approach them directly for that opportunity. Yeah, and I think that's a really good question to ask. My approach in the first instance is always to make sure that I ask that person first and foremost, how or what was it about my approach to them that made them want to have a conversation in the first place, if I've headhunted that person, right? Because how they answer that question gives me an indication of how I approach the call. If they're like, you know what, I really love the sound of the role and I'm actively looking, then I know I can go in with a bit of a sell and I can really sell, upsell the opportunity, really kind of emphasize what it is about this company that's great. Whereas if they're someone that says, look, you know what, I'm just kind of seeing what's out there, I'm not actively looking, then I know it's a softer approach. And I have to be more tentative in the way that I speak to that person because they're not active in the market. And you can't oversell, you can't really push the opportunity. You have to make sure that you're giving information more so than trying to get it from them. Yeah, again, I think this is a really good question. I was talking to a colleague of mine about this recently because she had a candidate who was ghosting her. And I said, how would you deal with this? And she said, I'd probably go into a room and cry. But I think, for me, when I think about ghosting, and maybe this is that kind of older school mentality of being a recruiter that I have, but I think something's gone wrong in that process. If someone isn't answering my calls, I have to take accountability for something. And the way that I would try and reduce ghosting is by having the communication with that candidate on a regular basis. The more you speak to someone, the more you build rapport with them, the more they trust you. And they can kind of, you finish a call and you say, when are you free to speak next? They give you a date, they give you a time. Then that will reduce the level of ghosting that you're going to have. But if the conversation starts to run a little bit dry and that person isn't showing their availability or their enthusiasm, then naturally down the line, they are probably going to stop answering your calls, or maybe they're going to show that they're not as interested in the opportunity. Maybe something else that's coming on that's better. So I think my approach, if someone does start ghosting, is, again, very kind of, I guess, a tactic that not everyone would want to do, but I would call them from different numbers. If they don't know the number, then maybe they'd answer the phone. I would message them from different sources. So whether it's LinkedIn message and email using social media. But ultimately, if that person doesn't want to speak to me, just give them some space, And then I'd imagine after a few weeks or a month or so later, they've forgotten about you in some ways. And then you reapproach and they're like, oh my God, yeah, we spoke before. Let's have another conversation. Yeah, okay. If I look at the different tools that I use, it could be LinkedIn, our internal database, using even the job boards, as I mentioned before, and also getting referrals. If I break down kind of how I utilize those, for LinkedIn, standard, obviously you drop a message to someone, whether it's through your normal LinkedIn or LinkedIn Recruiter, or using LinkedIn to find people that are connected to people and trying to entice them there. I actually, when I join a business or when people join our business, I should say, I connect with everyone and I look at their connections and I try and entice people that they're connected to join the company I'm working at as well. In terms of the database, what's always useful is to re-engage with people that have applied to us in the last 6 to 12 months, even beyond that, to see where they're at in their career. Do you remember interviewing here? You had a great experience. Would you look again? And then referrals wise, who do people know? Good people know good people. So if they do want to refer someone to the business they enjoy working for, then that's a really easy kind of source for us. If I talk about kind of the space that I feel works best for me, I love using video platform technology. So, your tools where you can make a video introduction and send them to someone. And I use that quite a bit combined with LinkedIn. So when I message candidates, I'll make a video and it will be tailored to that person and their experience, and then sell the opportunity that I have open, and then I'll message that person. Because it's a different approach to just having to look at a generic message or email that comes through. So when I first speak to a candidate, the first thing I ask them, after obviously introducing myself and saying who I am, is really trying to understand how their search is going in terms of looking for a new role, if they are actively looking. And the reason I ask that question is because I want to know if this person has got a lot of opportunities on the go and they're active in the market, or if this is something that's brand new to them. Because again, talking from what I said earlier, taking that approach will give you a better understanding of how the conversation is going to go. And if you've got someone who's got lots of opportunities, they're probably a good candidate, right? So you're probably going to want to try and convince and persuade that person to speak to you and to want to do the role that you're selling to them. But if they are someone who's just started out in their search, then you know that you're going to have to give a lot of information to them. Yeah. Once you move on from that part, I do the generic kind of availability to start, location, find out about kind of things like HR policy stuff, right to work in the UK. If they were to, I even ask them if their company knows they're looking, because if they do say, yeah, you know what, I've spoken to my boss knows that I'm thinking of moving on, then again, it might be an easier conversation to have. But if they know that their company doesn't know they're looking, then you know that you have to be a little bit more respectful of they're obviously, they're still employed. They might not want to give too much information away. And then you qualify, then I move on to kind of my part where I sell the business, but I also sell the opportunity as well. And the premise behind that is to kind of say to them, look, this is the role. I want to make sure that it's something that you're bought into and that you feel that you can do. But also I want to tell you about the company, because we need to make sure that, you know, we're right for you, and then we need to understand if you have the right skill set for what we're looking for. Yeah. Right. And then I move on to learning more about the person, because you can learn as much as possible about their experience, their skill set, but people buy from people. So I ask them things like, what are you passionate about? What are you interested in outside of work? And just learning more about that individual. And it's part of that rapport building process. And then moving on to where else they're interviewing, finding out who we're competing against, where they're at in the process, what stages they're at. And then finally asking them if they have any questions for me. Because you tend to go through that call asking so much from someone, then you get to the end and you might not have covered everything off. So you just asking them if they need anything more from you. Again, going back to the kind of personality factor, if someone is very easy to speak to, then I know that it's going to be a good conversation. So if I give an example, when you ask someone, you know, oh, hi, how are you? How's your morning been? And they go, yeah, it's been all right. Then you know that it's going to be harder to get information from that person. They may not be as open to wanting to speak to you. But if the person's like, you know what, I've had a great morning, I've been up, I've gone for a lovely walk, I've got coffee, start my day, I'm ready to go. How's your morning been? Then you know that it's going to be a much more to and fro, that the person's going to be more open to talking to you about certain things. And I think that's one aspect I look for. I also look for people that really are quite decisive in being able to explain their experience while they move from one job to another, what they're looking for in their future opportunity. If you've got someone who really is clued up on why, and the why is what we look for in recruitment. Why do you want to move jobs? Why do you want to look at this location, wherever it might be? Why do you want that salary? But if they can articulate those points effectively and clearly, then yeah, 100% I want to talk to you. And I guess the final point is I love people that come from a competitive background, because we work in a competitive industry. So if they've got evidence in it, and evidence of competitiveness isn't just in sports. We always look at it and go, oh, if they're a sports person, they're competitive. But if they've done anything competitive, I remember interviewing someone once, and they had been in a chess club and actually been playing in chess tournaments, and I didn't know anything about the chess world, and then they were explaining to me how they had to go through certain games to become certain levels within chess. I was like, wow, that's really great and really interesting to learn. So yeah, those are the factors I look for. So I think back to when I first started, and I remember almost being subservient in the way that I worked. And because the person I was speaking to had, a lot of years experience in their industry sector, especially when it was in the IT sector, I would take a lot of what they say on face value. I wouldn't really question any of it, because they knew their job better than me. So I think when you first start out, you presume a lot. And you should never presume in this job, because you should always try and learn a bit more as possible. So, when you first start, if someone gives you an answer, for example, when you ask if you can commute to a certain area, and they're like, yeah, I can commute. Never presume that that's just the right answer. If someone lives in an area where they have to drive to the station and then get the train from there and then get a bus from where they get off on the other end, then that actually is quite a long commute. And if you don't delve into that in deeper and try to understand those points, then that could hinder your ability to place that person at the final hurdle. So, it's about, when you speak to people, probe where you get the opportunity to probe. Almost be like, I call it a detective or an investigator. Put that different hat on, because every answer you get, if you feel that there's more clarity that's needed, ask that question. Otherwise, you'll never know. So actually, that's separate from kind of that whole aspect of presuming. The biggest mistake I've ever made is actually I took a role once that was purely for money and title. And you know, I think everyone in their career at some point gets to the point where they're like, I feel like I am better than I am, maybe. And I took a role purely for the money and the title, not necessarily for the opportunity as such. And it was a mistake to jump at that role at that point, but I don't regret it. It was a learning curve for me, and I gained some great experience from being in that position. But looking back on it, I think what's important is if you feel that if you've got like flashing lights coming at you, someone's headhunting you for a role and they're saying you could be great for this position and it's more money, you know, but you don't know if you're 100% ready for that, take your time, assess where you're at, and think about what more you can learn, because you will find your footing eventually. And I think people that are successful who stay in recruitment companies for long periods of time are the ones that can assess and adapt to situations, and they're patient, and they jump or they take the opportunity when the time is right.
Something like that.
Yeah, there are some red flags. I mean, if you're speaking to someone about an opportunity and they give excuses for why they've moved from role to role, and they don't take accountability in what they've done, then for me, that concerns me a little bit. It's the same as if when someone speaks ill of their employer, or they've talked about falling out with a manager or members of staff. There's that kind of that there's an idea, if you will, that it's someone else's fault. But then in my mind, I'm like, but what did you do? And how does that person perceive what you did at that point of view? Yeah. So when someone is communicating those aspects to me, I do have some concerns and I do have some worries. I think the other thing as well to bear in mind when you're speaking to a candidate is, if you're, especially in recruitment, you know, we want to be able to sell our candidates into our clients in the right way. If you're working with someone who works in a performance-based role, then you need to be able to get evidence that they have performed well. And if you ask a candidate how successful they've been and they come across really coy and they don't want to give you that information, in my mind, I'm a bit like, but if you're really good at what you do, you probably want to shout about it. You probably want to tell everyone about how good you are. So if you're coming across really coy and you don't want to talk about how successful you've been, it starts to make me question if you have been successful. Yeah, so again, when I think back to when I first started, there's two aspects here that I think new recruiters need to take into account. One, your relationship with the manager. Two, your relationship with the candidate. And it's about managing expectations at both sides, at both parties, and working to timeframes effectively with both parties as well. To delve in deeper into that, if you're working with a hiring manager and they've given you a job specification and you literally just take it on face value, as I mentioned earlier, then you don't really have all the answers you're looking for. But if you delve in deeper, you're probing, you're asking everything you possibly can to know that you fleshed out that role. So you know what the best candidate looks like, you know where you should be looking for those individuals, how many hours they need to work, or the working hours are, where they need to be based, whatever it might be, then you kind of get a better idea of who you need to go after. And then when you're speaking to the candidates, you need to manage their expectations. You know, they tell you what they're looking for, you sell an opportunity, but what if it's this part of the role? What if it's that part? Is it still going to be in line with what you're looking for? You know, how did your partner feel about this part of the role, or whatever it might be? Because managing expectations is going to allow you to build a better relationship with the client. Therefore, they're going to be able to want to work with you a bit better, and the candidate will believe in you and trust you a lot more, and they want to be in the process. And then from a time aspect as well, every time you speak to a client, if you want to try and book an interview, don't go back and forth and say the candidate's available here, can you do this time? Get options. When can you do on Monday? When can you do on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, whatever it might be? And it's the same with the candidate. Every time you speak to them, if I need to get hold of you during the working day, what's the best way to approach you? What's the best time to call you? Because naturally, by doing that, it speeds up the process. It's less points of contact and communication. And then you can manage the expectations, and you can book in the interviews, you can get the final booked in the quicker in the process, and hopefully it leads to a hire. Yeah, I think it goes back to what we've been discussing before about the communication things. I think back to someone who I worked with who once said that if you know your candidates or clients like the back of your hand, if you know the name of their children, for example, then you really have got a good relationship with that individual. And I think that the more rapport you build with that person, the more points of contact you have, the better that control is going to be in the process. So you know that if that person starts to not be able to speak to you, or they're busy, or they're not answering your calls, that something might have gone awry. But if you're able to contact that person and say, can you speak in 10 minutes? And like, yeah, cool, call me now, actually. I'll walk out and I'll leave the office floor and you can call me now. You've got a better relationship with them. And that is kind of, for me, the big piece for keeping that process. And at the point of every contact, you're asking them, have you been approached by other companies? Are you still interviewing elsewhere? What stage are you at? Managing those expectations, keeping the conversation on a continuous basis are really key points for that.